mindset concept. I feel like it doesn't get talked about a ton in our space. Like, I mean, I think, we probably talk about it in different ways, but in terms of this context, it doesn't. And I think once you understand this, it's really, really game changing. Oh yeah, that's why you're confused. Totally get that. We'll fix that for sure. But it's a real game changer. So the thing I want to talk about is identity versus circumstance. So identity is what impacts all of our actions. It's what makes us behave in a certain way, right? Circumstance is just an experience that we're having. And so where I see a lot of business owners get stuck is they're not taking on the identity that actually serves them and is going to impact their actions the most. They're really focused on the circumstances. So for example, say you had a launch that went super well, you were really happy with it. You can see that as a one-time circumstance and then, still have the identity of like, I'm not someone who's successful, and really kind of do this thing to yourself where you're like, yeah, I had one good launch, but, I don't know about the next one, or, the other shoe is going to drop, or do all that stuff to ourselves that discounts our wins because we just see them as a circumstance. Or I can take on that identity. Like, I'm someone who launches successfully. I'm someone who has success. I'm someone who, makes sales, whatever, right? And that is where things really shift, is when you can take a set of circumstances and really, really start to embody that as part of your identity. But if you keep seeing circumstances that happen, like whether it's signing a client or having a great launch or having a win in your business, or, even like posting content or showing up, if you keep seeing those as just like a circumstance that happens, it's always going to feel like you're treading water. You're always moving from this circumstance to that one, to that one, to that one, but your identity isn't matching it, right? And you're going to behave based on your identity, not based on your circumstance, right? Does that make sense? Machine said, is that imposter syndrome? I think they can be related. I think, part of imposter syndrome is like not embodying that identity of like, not an imposter, right? Or like successful business owner or whatever. So I think they can be related, not exactly the same, but totally. Virginia said, such a great topic to reflect on. Totally. Alessia loves this. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Yeah. This is really, really important to look at in your own business. Like, you have to really take stock of like, what do I see as my identity versus what circumstance is happening? Like, for example, my clients that see their identity as like, I am someone who launches successfully, even if they have challenging circumstances during a launch, like say it's not going how they thought it would or whatever, it's still really easy for them to show up for the most part for that, because their identity makes it easy to take those actions. They see themselves as someone who launches successfully. So even when the circumstance isn't quite matching that, they're like, well, I can still take the action. Like, I'm someone who has successful launches, so I must just need to fix something or tweak something or whatever. When I see myself as someone who, is always like behind the pack, or like never does enough, or is like never quite successful enough, that's going to show up too. So if I have a launch that's not going quite to plan, what I'm probably going to do is just retreat or want to stop it or completely pull back, because my identity is ultimately what's, impacting my actions. Or even the opposite. Say I see myself as someone who, really, really, really struggles in a launch, right? But say my circumstance is actually that it's going really well. Guess what? I'm very likely to start taking some self-sabotaging actions in that, or lack of action potentially, because I really do not see myself as someone who's going to have this successful launch, right? And so it's so freaking important to actually look at that, because that is going to be the determiner of your behavior far more than actually what's happening at any given time in your business. And so what we do in business a lot of times is we think if I can just get the circumstance to look a specific way, then I'll feel X. And the reason that it's so important to see this like identity versus circumstance is because it's not true. It's like, if I can embody X, then no matter what circumstance comes up, I really trust myself to show up and adjust for that, right? So it's so important to be able to see this. I have quite a few examples that I wanted to kind of go through, but that's just like overarching view of why I think this is so important. And where I really see clients potentially thrive or potentially get themselves really stuck, it's not so much in the exact thing that they're doing or the circumstance that's happened in any given moment. It's like who they see themselves as in that moment, who they're identifying with, right? And so it's been forever since I read this, but in the book Atomic Habits, like they talk about how, you know, identity impacts things that you do. So I think they use the example, like I'm going to kind of butcher this because it's been a while, but I think they use the example of like working out. It's like, if you see yourself as someone who always works out, taking that action is so simple. Like you almost don't even think about it. I think I'll use the example of like, if you see yourself as a runner, like whether you've been there or you know someone that identifies with that, like if I see myself as a runner, it's really easy to run multiple times a week, right? If I'm like, oh, I'm just not a runner, I don't really see myself as that, like, you know, that's just not me. I think running's really hard. Of course, I'm not going to like all of a sudden change and then be out running multiple times a week, right? So the identity piece is what impacts so many of our actions in terms of like actually doing the thing that will get us the result. So like, you know, if I want the result of being someone who runs or being someone who works out, I have to start embodying that identity. It's so tricky because we think it works the opposite way. Like, oh, I get the result and then the identity shows up, and it's totally not, right? Yep, exactly. I'm Louise. That's why acting as if works so well, because you're taking on that identity, right? What are the characteristics you think is important for us to embody as entrepreneurs? I will definitely answer that, Nasheen. We're gonna circle back to that because I think that's really important. But yes, I'm even gonna put it on my little note here so I don't forget. Alessia says, I think I still identify myself as someone not consistent. So I think I sabotage my consistency in showing up when everything is going well. 100%, right? If I don't see myself as someone who's consistent, it's almost impossible to take that action. Maybe temporarily I can create a circumstance in which I'm being consistent, but it's really, really, really hard to do that over time. And so that's why, you know, again, like this is the mindset hack that matters. And this is the root of the things that we have to look at, because you could take whatever, borrow someone else's calendar, take 15 courses on like how to set up your day for more consistency, blah, 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 right? But if you just truly do not think that's who you are as a person, and that's not at all where your identity lies, it's going to be so hard to stick with it, right? So really, really good to see. Or like another thing that I think people do is like, you know, are you still seeing yourself as like not an entrepreneur? Like, are you still seeing yourself as like a worker bee almost? I see that happen a lot to people in their business too. Like, you know, they come from that corporate mentality and they see themselves as kind of just like worker in their business, to-do list accomplisher, not CEO. And when I see clients make that shift into like identifying truly as the CEO of their business, it's wild what changes. But again, like if you're not consciously making that effort and you're just trying to be like, what's a CEO task that I'm supposed to do to be like a good CEO? Like you're not really changing your identity. You're just maybe momentarily changing the circumstance, you know? I call the identity my self-image, unless there's a difference that I'm missing here. Yeah, I think similar. Yeah, totally. I think you can use those pretty interchangeably in terms of like, it's like the version of how you see yourself, right? Jordan said, I don't see myself as someone who nails sales calls. I guess I need to truly believe it first. Is that what you're saying, Jordan? 100%. So like one of the like locked in identities I feel like I've had since the beginning of my business that has been really helpful is like if I get on a call with someone, they want to buy from me. Like that has been such an important identity for me to embody, and then has so impacted my actions in terms of like, I'm always willing to make the sale, talk to someone, have a conversation. Like that's, something I preach all the time. And seeing yourself as someone who like, if I get on a call, I know I close, I know people enjoy it, I know I give them a great experience, whatever. You're just going to necessarily go after more calls. You're going to show up totally differently. If you see yourself as someone who doesn't nail sales calls, there's also this way where you're just going to push sales calls away because you're like, well, I'm kind of bad at them and I don't nail them anyway. Right. So changing that identity to like, I'm someone who gives like amazing experiences on sales calls, blah, 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 right? Like such a game changer. I know I need to think that it just hasn't landed yet. Totally. And, sometimes we just have to practice thoughts, which we can talk about too. Virginia said, I feel it helps to really love what you do in your business. Oh, I lost it. Virginia, if you could like copy paste the rest of that, that would be so helpful. Emily says, you taught me that one. It's true for me now too, because I decided. Exactly. So good, Eloise. Oh, you're so welcome, Catherine. Thank you for being here. Ashley said, I often find that my clients feel like embodying is so hard when you don't truly believe or have evidence to back it. What would you say to someone about that? I think that it's just like changing your mind about how it works, if that makes sense. So once you understand identity versus circumstance, I think it's really helpful because you're like, well, okay, so there's almost no way I could change the circumstance, at least in a lasting way, unless I change the identity. So let me do that work. But when we think, oh, as soon as I start nailing sales calls, then I'll believe I can nail sales calls, right? You're always going to be on that hamster wheel. But it's really not about the sales calls. It's about what do you believe has to come first? Do you know what I mean? So I think like that's almost the route we have to get to with our clients is like, what do you really want to believe about this? What do you really see as true here? And I think for most of us, when we really do kind of like a deep dive on this, we're like, oh, yeah, I would have to believe that before my actions and circumstances started to change to match that, right? Hey, Raquel. Yes, changing your mind about how it works. Exactly. And like, that's when I see things really start to click, for people is not like, okay, how do we get you to believe sales calls work for you? It's like, how do we get you to believe that the most important work you could do is to start reinforcing that sales calls work for you, right? And that's when I think things change. And so, yeah, we have to practice those thoughts. Like the thought Jordan said of like, I don't nail sales calls. That's just a practice thought that she's had and thought enough times that it's become an identity, right? And so we need a new practice thought that we have and think enough times that it becomes an identity. So, that can take time and energy and effort and all of those things. But if we see that as better time, energy, and effort spent than just trying to manipulate the circumstance while we're fighting our own identity, I think that's when things shift. Hey, Stephanie. So glad I made it for this combo, such an important one. Thank you for being here. Yes. What do you believe has to come first? Yes, it totally does. And, I think that's when we are all talking about like, I decided I locked in, I decided like, this is what we mean, right? It's like, I decided that people were going to get on the phone with me and want to buy, right? And because I decided that, my actions matched that. And then eventually my circumstances did. But if I waited until my circumstances did, I would be waiting a very long time. And I probably wouldn't be really taking a lot of actions that supported that. Even if I wanted to, I would probably, even subconsciously, be taking a ton of actions that did not support that. You know what I mean? So that's really helpful to see too. Like what we have to keep bringing it back to is like our identity is what is going to influence our actions and our behavior. And our actions and our behavior greatly impact our circumstances and our results. And so when we work it backwards, the only thing that makes sense to focus on most is the identity, instead of trying to like push through all these actions that we think we're supposed to take when we really don't see ourselves like that. Like the example Alessia gave, like trying to force consistency when I don't see myself as someone who's consistent at all is exponentially harder than being like, how can I find small ways to believe I could be consistent? You know, how do we determine what we believe about ourselves? How do we get clear on that? I mean, I think it's as simple as being like, what do I want to be true here, right? Like if I want to be a successful entrepreneur, like how do I start seeing myself as that? What do I believe about that? Or like Jordan's able to identify, oh, I can see that I have this, I don't know, sales calls identity. And if that changed, a lot of things could change in terms of my sales. So it's like really looking at like, what do I believe now? And is that serving me? And if it's not, what would I want to change around that? Right. So as broad as seeing yourself as a successful entrepreneur, and as specific as like, every time I get on the phone with someone, they always buy from me, you know? Hey, Julia, happy Monday. Oh, that's okay, Virginia. I'm sorry I missed it. It just moved a little fast there. So like, to get specific, like, do I have the identity of a successful business owner? I would just look at that even. And again, most of us are like, well, I have to have the success first. And I can just tell you from doing this work for so long and working with, you know, so many clients that have had massive success over the years, they see themselves as that first. I'm not saying it's 100% of the time or that they never have a wobble or a bad day or a bad week, but they truly see themselves as someone who is going to create this success, right? So like I said, even when the circumstances are like maybe not looking perfect, which of course they always ebb and flow in entrepreneurship, they still see that, right? As like, I'm still someone who is successful. I might just be someone who is having a bad week, or I'm still someone who is successful. I'm just someone who's having a tough launch. Like, vastly different things than like taking that circumstances on like, well, I'm having a tough launch, so I suck. Every launch from here on out, it's going to suck and I should probably just stop, you know, so different. Leah, thank you. Can I just applaud you for doing this so beautifully pregnant? I could barely get through a full sentence without losing my breath. Okay. I feel like that right now. I recorded a podcast recently and had to like caveat the beginning with like, I am well. Don't worry if you hear me gasping. Don't worry. But thank you for saying that. I'm glad that it's not coming across, because I feel like I'm like still sometimes. Okay, and then the next one is like, do I have the identity of someone that gets X result, right? So that's another thing too, is like, you know, do I even see myself as someone who can have that thing, whatever it is that you want? Like, one of my clients had to work through this so much, like when she wanted to hit her first 10K months consistently, like there was this part of her that really thought like that wasn't her, like that identity was someone else. Like the 5-figure month entrepreneurs are this and I'm this, right? And that was the work that we had to do to actually get her to hit 10K months. It wasn't that we like massively changed her strategy up or, you know, reworked her entire audience or anything like that. It was like she had to start seeing that she could be that person that hit 10K months. She had to start seeing herself as someone that could have that identity or could embody that identity. And that's when I really, really saw it take off for her. And then it took off really fast. It was like 10K, 14K, 20K. Like it popped because she started to believe that that was possible for her. She started to see herself as that. One of the problems in our space is that we tend to pedestal people that are like making more than us, right? And it makes that identity feel so far away. I can't be successful because I haven't made X, or I can't be the 5-figure month entrepreneur because I don't have branding photos that look like that. Like we really create a lot of separation in our identity in terms of thinking that's not me, right? And when we can shift that and see like our work is to be like, that is me, like, my photos might not look like that, but like that 5-figure month entrepreneur can be me. That's when things change. It's not, oh, I make that and then I realize that I can be that. Like, I truly have to see that in myself first, and then another one that I was going to give as an example that Jordan kind of gave too is like, do I see myself as like someone who closes sales calls, or do I see myself as someone who struggles with sales, right? And I see that so much in our space is that we get so identified with what we're bad at, because that's kind of the marketing game in our space, that it becomes like this ingrained identity in us so quickly, right? And then again, it impacts our actions. So if I see myself as someone who doesn't close sales calls or is really bad at sales or whatever, I promise you, your actions are going to show that. That's when we can get down that rabbit hole of buy a million programs, spend all this money trying to fix this thing, while still thinking I'm bad at it, like I've seen that with so many people where they'll take like 5 sales courses or whatever, but they still identify as someone who is bad at sales. So those courses don't matter. They're just money spent, right? Versus if I see myself as someone who closes sales calls, it doesn't mean I never get sales support, but I'm not doing it in this really like, kind of like desperate way to change my identity. I'm like, well, I already see myself as that, and I could use some support to do that. Here's that support, and like, let me take that further. You know what I mean? It's just such a different place to come to it from. But again, it will impact your actions. Or maybe instead of buying all the courses, you're just busy closing sales, but don't think that your thought about that won't change your actions. I think that is such a fallacy that we get stuck in. Is like, yeah, I think I'm bad at sales calls, but no, I'm really going to do the course. And I'm like, I'm going to show up for it and it's going to be fine. And I'll do all the things they say. Right. That's like, not seeing yourself as a runner, but being like, I'm going to buy one running plan and then it'll just be super easy and I'll run every day. Doesn't work like that. Right. Ashley said the reality too is that when we see others who have what we want, there's a piece of them, what we want, there's a piece of them that's also in us. So that's such a beautiful jumping off point to work on identity. It's like, if she can have it, so can I, even if we don't immediately believe it. 100%. Yes. Virginia says, yes, the comparison game is detrimental to getting sales. Totally. Into our own identities, right? Because we think like this person is like the epitome of this, right? Instead of like, I can have my own version of that. So just really, really important to see that. And then another thing I want to talk about is like, do I see my wins and circumstances, or do I see my wins as circumstantial instead of like really taking them in? So this is something else I see a lot of people struggle with that I want to talk about as it relates to this, which is they see their win as a circumstance and they don't embody it as an identity. So, say you filled your one-on-one practice. Hey, Emily, say you filled your one-on-one practice. Okay. Awesome. Do I start to see myself as someone who now is consistently full? Or do I start to freak out and go, oh my God, I'll never do this again. What if I can't do this again? What if this does, what if the other shoe drops kind of thinking? And I think that's really important to see too, because every circumstance gives us a chance to take on that identity if we want. So when I film my one-on-one, like I can start to reinforce, do the work, have those daily thoughts that say, I am someone who's always full. Or I can be like, well, this happened one time, but it probably won't happen again. And then start embodying that. Right. So again, if I zoom out and how I see this as clients, it's the clients who have the win and then are like, this is just mine now, that continue to get it, versus have the win and like don't trust the win and don't make it part of their identity. Does that make sense? Julie says, ooh, this resonates. I can tend to think that way and panic that I won't be able to replicate when good things are happening in business. 100%. There's obviously a ton of reasons we all do that, but being able to be like, what if I made this win or this good thing part of my identity would be so helpful. And then plus you have the circumstances on your side at that point. So it's even easier to reinforce for your brain, right? One of my clients, I always tell this story because I think she's such a good example of like taking on the identity right away. But hey, Amal, thank you for being here. Yes, Emily, trust the win. She's such a good example of this, but basically like, I think when she had her first 20K month, I'm pretty sure it was 20K. This was a while ago. She went and bought 2 Cartier bracelets. Okay. And I remember at the time being like, oh, dang, like, good for you. Like, that was like, full embodiment and full trust. And she was like, well, if I did it once, I can do it again. Like, I'm just someone who makes 20K months now. It's like, yes. Right. So I'm not saying everyone needs to go out and buy 2 Cartier bracelets. That's not the point. It was just like, for her, it was like, she was taking on that identity. Like, these represent like that I am someone who just makes 20K months, who can do this again and again, who now knows how to make this happen. And her business grew exponentially and very quickly. And she's, has an incredible business now. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to go take that action of like buy something extravagant or whatever, but you can just see how different that was. Or I can think of another situation. I had 2 clients that this happened at different times, but it's just interesting to compare. But on their first launch, both of them made around 10K. And one of them, when she did, was like, oh, well, this is the beginning of everything. Like, if I can make 10K off one launch, like I can make 20, I can make 30, I can make 50. I think she just had a 250K launch, right? Because when she made that first 10, she was like, oh, I have the identity of someone who successfully launches. And now, like, I can just do that. I had another client who had 10K as her first launch, and she was super upset with herself. Like, she felt like it should have been more. She felt like it wasn't enough, and definitely felt like, I am not someone who launches successfully. But they had the same circumstance. Does that make sense? And they just identified with it differently. And so that client, we had to do so much more work to move to her next launch, because if we can't take that win and embody it, it's going to be really hard. Like, it won't matter next time, even if you had a 20K and then a 50K launch, whatever, it still wouldn't land. You'd still be like someone who doesn't do enough, right? Love it when you tell your client success stories. Thank you, Virginia. I so appreciate that. But like, what's so helpful to see there is like, again, we think we can manipulate the circumstance. Oh, if I could just have a launch like so-and-so had for her first launch, then I'll know I'm going to be successful. But you can have a launch like so-and-so had for her first launch, who's now having 250K launches. But unless you take that in and you decide that this means that you are someone who has successful launches, it's never really going to like trip the wire that you want it to and actually change how you show up in your business, how you move forward, how you run that next launch, etc. Right? But when you have that circumstance and you make it mean the thing you want it to mean, I'm great at this and look at what's next. If I did it once, I can do it again. Like, that's when things really start to shift. I love that. How I identify with my circumstances in my business. Exactly. Yes. Like, how am I identifying with the circumstances that are happening? And am I creating the identity I want from that? Right? Because if I'm creating the identity that I don't want from that, there's no work that's more important than to go, wait a second, this is not working for me. This is not what I want to make this mean. Because if I make this mean whatever, like, I suck at this, I never do enough, it's never good enough, people don't want what I have to offer, do you really think you're running at that next launch, taking what you learn, like making it soar? Probably not, you know? And like, that's okay. We all have bumps in the road. That isn't like to shame that. It's just to say it will impact what you do next. And I think that in this space, sometimes we get so quick to kind of write that off and not see it as like how, and not see how impactful it will be to what we do next. Do you know what I mean? Hey, Jess, needed to hear all of this today. Yes. So good. Right. So really start asking yourself these questions, like what circumstances are happening in my business? And then what am I making my identity mean around them? Right. I even remember like, something that happened to me early on. This is just a small example, but I think about those things that happened early on in business that really formed a lot of my identity. And I had a really difficult client pretty early on. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, like, I get to decide what this means. Like, this either means clients are difficult and they're all going to be like this. And, you know, maybe I just shouldn't do it. Or I get to make it mean that, you know, if I sold, you know, one client on this, I can sell another and I can replace this client, right? So it helped me to kind of get in that headspace of empowerment and take the action to say to her, hey, like, if you're not going to respect these boundaries, we can't work together, because I identified and believed like I can get more clients, versus if I hadn't, it would have been so easy to, one, not set the boundary with her, but two, really decide that like all clients were going to be like this and start to see like that's what it has to be like in my business from now on, you know? I think it's just, it's that choice that we're making, and it's what we decide to put in our brains. And again, like, we all want to do every other ounce of work we could possibly do. But look at what we're putting in our brains. But if you do not get really clear on what your identity is in relation to something, it's going to impact every single action that you take. And it's really going to impact your business. Like, there is not just a business that just has really difficult clients, right? Like, even if I see that in my clients, like, I can see what they've decided to identify with about that, you know? Oh my God, so glad to hear you had a difficult client. Yours all sound amazing. So that is nice to hear. I mean, you know, here's the thing. I think they are all amazing, but I also am really, really good at setting boundaries that make that a true thing too. And again, part of why I'm good at setting boundaries is, one, because I identify with being really good at setting boundaries, and two, because of that exact thing I just said, right? Of like, when it happened, I was like, I have two choices here. What am I making this difficult client mean, right? I get to decide what this means. Preach. Hi, Maggie. So good to see you. Oh, I'm glad you thought it was a good example. Yes. Stephanie said, I think comparison comes into play hardcore because we see confident coaches out there that may be struggling on the inside, but exude confidence on the outside. I think it's good to remember that everyone has moments of mindset-ish. 100%. Like, nobody doesn't. It's just what they do with them. And like, you know, when you see that person that's super confident or whatever, it's not about like, you know, do they have those bad moments necessarily? Although all of us do. I think it's so much more about like, how are they still showing up in the midst of those? Mm-hmm. And that's really important too. This is just like another example, but a lot of you guys know I had a really, really, really tough personal month last month, which is like a lot of health stuff and in my family and all of that. And like, we had well over 100K month in a lit up life. It was by far the hardest month I've ever had in my life personally, and an exceptional month in our business in terms of, you know, bringing in over 100K cash. And, you know, it doesn't mean that I wasn't having a hard month, but it also doesn't have to stop me from showing up if I have the identity of like someone that gets a lot out of this business and that loves to show up. So, you know, last month for me, like, it felt so good to still show up. It felt so good to have that distraction. It felt so good to get that fulfillment in other ways. It wasn't because I was hiding feeling bad, it's because I really identify as someone who gets so much out of their business and who is like, finds that their business pours back into them. So I think it's just like how we relate to these things more so than what are the things, because trust me, like the circumstances of last month were total shit. Like I could have just lost my ish and not gotten out of bed, quite honestly. So it's just good to see that, right? Hannah said, I love hearing how it can be both and such an important thing to hold close when business or life gets hard. 100%. And I think, again, it's like, it comes back to that identity piece of like, what do I make this mean? You know, I think if I was identified with like, business is really hard and it takes a lot for me to show up, it probably would have been really, really hard for me to show up last month. But I really identify as like the business pours into me. I love being with my clients. It gives me so much. So it was much easier, again, for the actions of keep showing up. Not that I couldn't have taken more time if I wanted to or whatever, but it's the identity impacts it so much. You know what I mean? Right. Thank you, Emily. So true, Hannah. Yes, totally. So that's what's important to see. It's not necessarily like we want to compare in terms of like, you know, what is someone doing? But I think so much more is like, what is that person identity? Like, what are they embodying? Like, if we can look at that and learn from that versus comparing to that, I think that's what gets really exciting. Nasheen said, you had the say in bad moment circumstances with the identity of showing up in my business. Identity one, love that. Exactly. When you, identity will be the winner. Yeah, you just said identity always wins. It will be the winner. Like, that's why we have to work it and stop fighting it, because it wins every time. It's just like the same thing as like, if I identify as hating working out, the likelihood that I ever really work out consistently is zilch. You know what I mean? But if I like really change the identity, the actions get so much easier. Trisha says, yes, like when I went from 0 to 6 figures, but then clients went away, I could have decided I failed and business sucks, or I did it once and I can do it again. But it was so important to process that so I could help my mindset. Exactly. Because if that happens and you think, well, business sucks, I can't do this again, you're going to stop doing it every single time. Like, you'll just stop, right? And so I think that's really important to see. I think it's even helpful to like go back and look at things that have happened in your business and be able to say like, what was the identity at play there? Good, bad, or indifferent, and just learn from that. Because when you can learn from it on that scale, it's so much easier to address. When you're just learning from the circumstance, it still feels like you're jumping from circumstance to circumstance in your business instead of feeling like you're truly a successful entrepreneur, right? Like, I don't feel like a successful entrepreneur because we made 100K last month. I feel like a successful entrepreneur because I felt like that since I started, because I took that identity on as quickly and as early as I could, you know? Nasheen said, we will have these don't show up moments and circumstances all the time. The question is, does our identity match this, or does it say, get up, stand for your life, just having some fun? Yes, yes, totally. I mean, again, it doesn't mean you can never have a bad day or a bad moment or a bad week or any of those things. It's just like, what gets you back isn't going to be that finally the right circumstance showed up. What gets you back into things is going to be what you have decided is true about you, right? And so that's where the work is. And so, especially if you're someone that maybe has created success in different ways, but doesn't feel successful, or always feels behind, or always feels like, you know, their success is fleeting, I guess I would say, you know, the other shoe's going to drop, like we were saying earlier. This is the work. It's not go create another circumstance that guarantees, you know, you never have a hard time in business again. That's not happening. You know, like, I feel like always the bearer of bad news when I say that, but like, we spend so much time in this industry looking for the perfect fix, looking for that one strategy that works every single time, looking for that one launch that makes us feel like, our success will just always look like that. Looking for that one program that just tells us the thing that makes it so we never have a hard day in business again. And we know why our brains do this. That's how they operate. But we spend so much time doing that instead of being like, the truth is, there are going to be plenty of up and down circumstances in business because that's life, that's business. Just like, how I was saying, I had such a hard life month last month. In January, I had written a post about how last year was the best year of my life. And then February was by far the hardest month of my entire life. Because life, right? And the same will be true in business, because business. But when we can work on the things that underpin all of that, like our identity, that's when it really gets good. When we focus so much on those circumstances, I'm allowed to be happy right now because I had a good year. I'm not allowed to be happy right now because I had a bad year, whatever, or bad month, whatever. That's the trap, right? I can't feel good or successful because I had a bad launch. That's the trap. I am successful even when I have a bad launch. I am successful even when I have a tough month. That's what changes the game, and that's what changes how you show up and what your results are every time. So if you're not doing that identity work, if you're not picking what you make this mean, if you're not making those decisions, if you're not choosing what thoughts you want to put in your brain about yourself and who you are and what it means, you're just missing the most important hack of it all, right? Julia said, yeah, because life, exactly. Julia said, hey, Lucy. Julia said, this is why this is called doing the work, because it's so easy to get back to the negative thinking when things are tough. Oh my God, 100%, right? It took a lot of effort for me last month to not spiral the fuck out, right? But when I look back on it, incredibly worthwhile effort that I would repeat again and again and again and again, right? But still work, or I could be doing the work right now of trying to get myself to show back up in my business, or, show back up in my life because I've been in bed for a month. I would much rather do the work every day of choosing what I want to believe and what I want to feel and what I want to identify with than let my brain run wild and then have to do all the work of trying to show up in spite of that. That's not easier, right? So don't skip out on that, because it really does make the difference. Whether you're deciding what a circumstance means for you, or you're having a great circumstance and you really want to, embody and identify with that, either way, this is the work that matters and is what sets the foundation for your business literally for years to come. Like I said, early on, there were a lot of decisions I made about what difficult clients mean, how I am on sales calls, if I'm successful, and those have set the foundation for growing $1 million business, having 100K months. The things that are happening now were set because of the identities that I enforced back then. And I'm not saying that in a way of oh my gosh, if you missed doing it early, that's a problem. It's not. You can redo it any moment. That's kind of the beauty of it. I'm just saying that deciding what those are is foundational business and mindset work. So putting the time into that will literally serve you for years, right? Just said, I think the past 5 years have primed me for handling biz challenges. They've been the most difficult, hard, and yet rewarding years so far. Thanks for modeling this for us. Oh, you're so welcome. Yes, so good. Yeah, totally. And sometimes the hard times force you to pick what your identity is, right? It forces you to go, what are you going to make this mean? What does this say about you? I think we all kind of had to decide that when COVID started and stuff, right? We had to be I am someone who, wades through these circumstances, or I am someone who can't run a business during times like these. We had to pick. I remember having so many conversations with my clients around that time in 2020 of being who are you going to be in this situation? Like, what's your identity? Who are you showing up as? Who are you going to ultimately decide you are as it relates to this? And that was a game changer. Like, most of my clients absolutely thrived through that time. And I really believe it's because early on we decided what it was going to mean for them. And yeah, like, it doesn't mean they didn't have to show up and take the action and do the work. Of course, that's part of it. But again, the action piece gets so much easier when you nail the identity. The action piece is really fucking hard when you don't nail the identity, right? So keep coming back to that in your own business. Keep seeing that as the most important and foundational work you can do. Because from there, yeah, take a course on sales or whatever and get some support on the action, sure. But it will be so much easier to actually take on what that course is saying and actually take those actions instead of getting all in your head about like how you're not someone who ... right? So I hope this is really helpful. I hope it just gives you a frame to think about things through. If there are places in your business that you feel really challenged or really kind of stuck in right now, this is what I would go back to. Like, where am I looking at the circumstances? What am I making that mean? What is my identity around this? And then think of what those identities that you want to embody could be. Again, like I said, a few for me are like, anytime I get on a sales call or anytime I get on a call, someone wants to buy from me. My clients always respect my boundaries. I'm someone who's really, really exceptional at boundaries. I'm someone who has amazing clients. I am someone who is successful. I am a really successful entrepreneur. I'm a great CEO, like things like that, where because I really believe all that and have spent years reinforcing it, it's just super easy for me to show up like that on a daily basis. And that's where I experience a lot of ease in business, is because it's easy to show up from those places I want to show up from. And so my actions align to that and get me the results I want most of the time, right? Thank you, Ashley. So glad you're here. How did you reinforce it? I mean, every day, right? This is your mindset work. This is watching what your thoughts are. This is putting in intentional thoughts like affirmations. Like, it's looking at what action can I take in this situation that reinforces the identity I want. It's like one of those like living, breathing things that is work every day, whether that's in a journal, in your headphones, with a coach, whatever. And again, it just takes that effort, but that effort is something that's going to pay off exponentially and is much easier than kind of fighting yourself on actions all the time. So I really hope this helps. This helps my clients a ton when we do this work and look at this stuff. So I think it will really, really support you guys. Let me know if you have more questions on this, if you're watching the replay. And otherwise, I hope that you have a beautiful Monday. All right, bye guys. Oh, and remember, if you comment, I will pick someone to win the Million Her bundle tomorrow. So I will do that on Tuesday. But anyway, just thank you as always for being here. I so appreciate it. All right, bye guys.